We want to go ahead today on the MegaCast and bring in Taylor DesOrmeau. He is with MLive and he covers Michigan's economy. It's great to have you with us again. I think the last time we had you on, you had just started in your position.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year for sure. I started the year covering Jackson, and then I transitioned to cover the business and economy. And then for a few weeks during the election, I was transitioned again to cover the Secretary of State's office. And now we're back to the economy and business. So it's been a little bit of everything. But I appreciate you guys having me on today.
So, Taylor, I read one article and they were saying that it's looking like the pandemic may be over by the time that Michigan's economy recovers, because we're looking at what, 2022, 2023 before we actually get back to some of these pre-pandemic numbers.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I've talked to a few economists in recent weeks, and I say after we had the biggest job losses and business closures in March and April, we started having the biggest gains back in May and June. So you could really see the swing back up was very strong. But since then, it's really started to taper off. We've kind of already got the low-hanging fruit in terms of the businesses that temporarily closed. So it's going to be a much slower recovery. I think the key is once things can be open again and once people aren't worried about catching the virus in public, whether they're vaccinated or the numbers are lower, I think that's going to be really the key to helping these businesses recover. But still, it's going to take probably until 2022, 2023 until we see, until we're really back to kind of where we were before. One good thing is it's going to open up some opportunities for entrepreneurs. If half of your city's restaurants closed, obviously that's a terrible thing, but that also gives some opportunities once there's demand again for people to start things up.
Because we did have Callie on with us a few weeks ago, and he talked about it. He said actually the number of people filing for new LLCs is up. So
Yeah.
do you think, is that a part, while it's hopeful, a lot of people will file for an LLC, but that business may never actually make it to fruition or even to profitability?
Yeah, we actually saw record numbers of new businesses start up this morning. Or I'm sorry, this summer, and it's kind of a double-edged sword because sometimes for people to really get pushed to start their own business, maybe they've been thinking about it for years and they haven't been sure about, should I start this? If they get laid off from their job, maybe now's the time to start it. So there's a lot of people starting cottage industry type things, and a lot of those LLCs maybe aren't ones that are going to have employers or employees. So maybe you're just starting up a cookie business, but you're the only employee. So while it's good to see a new business start up and something local like that, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be employees that come along with it.
Yeah, so we should say, because I have an LLC that I started a couple years ago, it's a quick process. It's an online process. I think it costs $50. And whether or not you take it to the next step or not, but some people do it just out of having that first step beyond them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe it's something that you can do while you're in between jobs. You can sell something or pick up take one of your hobbies and kind of monetize it a little bit. But it might not be something that's a long-term thing. But you never know. Sometimes things can blossom out of these from something small.
And so you mentioned while you're in between jobs. So we can talk about the unemployment right now in the state of Michigan. Things were looking up. We were kind of on the upswing, but then when the governor shut down the indoor dining and the restaurants, and I know a lot of people say, well, the restaurants could still be open, but they don't understand the impact of that. Where do things stand in the unemployment arena here in the state of Michigan?
Yeah, so there's nearly 1 million people unemployed in Michigan right now, and out of 10 million people in the state, that's still quite a lot. Like you said, once the latest restrictions started up again in November or so with closing down restaurants and things like that kind of led to an increase again. There's so many different unemployment numbers out there. One you might see is only about 4%, but that's just state unemployment. There's a lot of people who are on federal unemployment dollars. whether it's through the PUA program or the extended benefits or something like that. So there's a lot of different numbers out there. But basically just know this, there's still a lot of people on unemployment. And the good news is that the unemployment has been, the extra benefits because of the pandemic have been extended both on the state mostly and on the federal side. So there's still a lot of different avenues for unemployment. Plus the $300 extra is going into effect. So obviously in this last spring, we had people getting an extra $600. And for a while they were just getting the normal amount, and now they're getting the extra $300 again too, coming soon. So that's good news for people who are out of work, but obviously there's no substitute for actually having full-time employment.
So what are you hearing from employers? Because I do remember when so many people were getting that extra $600 from the federal government, they were having a hard time getting employees to come back to work, but that went away. And now even with the additional 300, is that still enough of an initiative to keep people that were unemployed to stay on unemployment?
Yeah, you're right. Especially in the spring, there was a lot of employers complaining, hey, my employers aren't even making my employees aren't even making half of what they can make on unemployment. Why would they want to come back? I haven't been hearing as much of that this time around with just 300. It's still probably maybe a little bit more than a lot of employees were making before, but it's more comparable. And I've actually heard some employers that are really pushing for things like this extra $300 because they really feel bad about laying off their staff. But if they know that they're going to be taken care of and going to be able to pay their bills, then it makes it a little easier to lay off people temporarily, knowing especially the ones that are kind of like the family businesses and the local businesses, they feel a lot better about laying people off for a short period of time if they know they're going to be taken care of.
Taylor DesOrmeau with us here on the Oakland County MegaCast. He's an MLive reporter that has the daunting task of covering Michigan's economy right now in the middle of a pandemic. And with that, what do you think is going to be the outlook, long-term outlook for the state of Michigan coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We have a story coming out later this week looking at Michigan's economy in 2020 and the damage the pandemic has done by the numbers. So we're looking at things like unemployment. That's obviously a big one. We're looking at consumer spending, small businesses, job postings, things like that. So there's a lot we're going to be looking at. One thing that's really interesting to kind of dive into is kind of who has been really hurt most by this pandemic. And when you look at the types of jobs, obviously hospitality ones, whether it's restaurants or hotels and things like that, those types of employees are obviously hurting more because those are the businesses that are suffering. But when you look at the amount of unemployment by what type of, if they're a high wage or medium wage or low wage workers, it's really interesting because the high wage, everyone pretty much took a dip in March when there was a lot of jobs that were going away. But some of the more white collar jobs where you can maybe transition to work from home easier, those are the jobs that really recovered the fastest. And same kind of with the medium wage, I kind of think about manufacturing or construction. Those came back after about a month or so as well, obviously with some restrictions and mask wearing and things like that. But it's really the low wage ones that are really kind of suffering the most. Obviously, a lot of those are back too. But I think about restaurants and in the hospitality industry specifically, and low wage workers are the ones that are suffering the most. And what's interesting is when you think back to like the 2008 recession, it was a lot of the medium and high wage workers that were out of work. So there's people that were with the auto industry, whether they were in the offices or on the manufacturing line. And now it's the lower wage workers. So it's interesting to see how the rebound will look different. I've talked to some people that said, if this were the high wage workers that were all out of business right now and weren't getting paid, the $2,000 stimulus would be a no-brainer. But with it, the low wage, it's more in debate. But anyways, I think we're looking at, it's going to be a little while. We hope that in the coming months, once the pandemic starts to taper off, that the economy will take a similar upswing.
But I look at that, Taylor, too, and I know people on both ends of the spectrum. And you look at the people that most need this, and they are being the most desperately hurt during this time, but some of them also don't qualify because these jobs in the restaurants were the jobs that were their extra jobs, right? They were maybe working another part-time job where they can still work at retail or this, that, and the other. But it was when you were working in the restaurants and the bars, those were the jobs that put food on your table, helped you pay your rent, and help in those other, fill that gap. And a lot of those people, like, when you're talking about $600, it's a slap in the face. Like, you're allowing me, you're telling me I can't work. And when people are saying, just go get another job, we see these signs for help wanted. But when you tell them, I work in the restaurant industry and I want to go back, these employers don't want to hire you and train you because they know you're going to leave when the restaurants are being able to reopen, because for them, they make on, so much of their salary is going to be based on tips, right?
Mm-hmm.
So am I going to stick in a $12, $13, $14 hour job that's secure, or which I'm going to have to make, work 30 extra hours a week to make what I was making 15, 20 hours a week in a bar or a restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
And unemployment doesn't fill that gap.
Yeah, and so many of these layoffs are supposedly temporary. People are like, well, once my business gets back up and going, I'm going to have a job and whatnot. So it's just going to be for a couple weeks, and obviously things have gone a lot more than a couple weeks. So, but when you're expecting to have your job back, you're not really looking for a new job. But then when things go longer than you expected them to, it really puts people in a pickle. And then when you do have two jobs too, that just makes filing for unemployment so much harder. Or if you just recently left a job to go to a new job and then you get laid off from the new job, then the old job, they're like, well, you left a job, so you're not eligible for unemployment. So I know we talked in past months about how much of a mess the unemployment system is, and it's still a headache. They're getting through calls a little quicker, but it's still definitely a pain in the butt for people.
Yeah, and can we touch on that a little bit? Where do things stand with the unemployment system here in the state of Michigan? Because they had a change in leadership recently. The guy just said, it was like he threw up his hands and said, forget it, I'm out of here.
Yeah, it was very sudden.
Where does that leave the employees and the people that rely on the system?
Yeah, most of the talk lately has been about the unemployment trust fund, which normally doesn't sound very exciting, but has really become thrown into the spotlight lately. So basically, there's this fund that employers pay into every year. And if they lay off more people, then they have to kind of contribute more the next year. So going into this year, there was $4.6 billion in this unemployment trust fund, which was one of the best of all the states. So Michigan was doing really well. Now we're at about $730 million. So we've exhausted about 80% of it. That's a concern to a lot of people. First off, there's a checkpoint. When the fund goes below $2.5 billion, then all the employers have to pay more the next year. So they're not happy about that, clearly. But once it goes below zero, people are still getting their benefits. It doesn't affect that at all. But then the state government has to get a loan to pay for the unemployment, and then the employers end up having to pay more as well. So it's really a mess. So the thing that's kind of been in the spotlight the past week or two is whether Michigan residents should get 26 weeks of unemployment or 20 weeks. Normally it's 20, but during the pandemic, the Governor Whitmer made it 26 weeks. The deal kind of ended up being that that the legislature made is, we'll give you 26 weeks, but also the state needs to pay $200 and some million to cover those extra weeks. And the legislature agreed on that, the Republicans and Democrats, but when it came time to be signed by the governor, she said, no, we're not spending $200 million on what normally the businesses would pay for. So she cut the funding, but that also cut the extra 6 weeks. So there's lots of drama and debate kind of about that. Oh, you're taking 6 weeks of unemployment off the table for people, but also there's this money that we need for other things. So long story short, anyone who's been on unemployment starting in 2020, they'll still get their full 26 weeks of state unemployment. But anyone who's going on unemployment starting this week, you might only get 20 weeks unless something changes in the next couple months with the legislature.
So, Taylor, I don't need to put you on the spot because I know that you're kind of new on this beat, but you're also a reporter. And a lot of what we talk about is information that the state is feeding people. They're feeding the public and they're feeding you as a reporter as well.
Hmm.
And we understand the deadlines and the pressure that our mainstream media are under. But in all honesty, what are you doing and what are you digging into for the accuracy of the information that the state is feeding you? Or
Hmm.
are you just, you can be honest, we understand. It's like, look, I was a mainstream media person, I get it. Like, you've got to turn it, you have deadlines. What are you doing behind the scenes to dig into the information and the numbers that they're giving you? And
Hmm.
should people follow you on your social media accounts to try to get that information?
Hmm. Well, one of the cool things that's really been enlightening is we get a lot of emails from people who are on unemployment, and the unemployment system from the state may say, hey, things are running smoothly, it's going great. But when you get dozens of emails from people who are on unemployment saying otherwise, it's a pretty good clue, hey, there's a problem. So we're able to connect with a lot of people who are having troubles with the system, and sometimes it's just a one-off, and other times it's indicative of a larger problem. So that's one thing. Another good thing is because Michigan is split by Democrat and Republican pretty evenly, you usually there's always two sides to a story, right? So, for example, last week the governor said, "Hey, this me signing this bill isn't going to affect anyone's unemployment," and the Republicans said, "Well, yes, it is. It's going to go from 26 weeks to 20 weeks." So we had to kind of do our research. We had both sides there and had to figure out who is kind of giving us smoke and mirrors here, and what's the actual truth. And usually it's somewhere in the middle. So I think the important things are talking to people who are actually experiencing the system, like people who are laid off and unemployed. Also, sometimes it comes down to reading the bills and reading the fine print, because sometimes they'll say one thing in a press release, but you never know what the actual fine print is going to be and how it affects people. So I think that's another key part too.
Well, Taylor, it's great to have you with with us. And I will say, as someone who's been in your spot, never take their press release. Do the research and go with the people. I remember back in the day, I was like, no, the government can't be wrong. All these people. No, always go with the people. They are experiencing what they are experiencing because of the backlog and the red tape and the government BS. So follow the people, be the voice of the people, and you have a big job ahead of you. So we want to say thank you for being with us, and thank you also for you and your MLive team for trying to get the story out there. But I do implore you, dig a little bit deeper than the BS numbers. I'm sorry. We're going to have Charlie the Duff on with us here a little bit later. So that's why I'm saying BS, because that's the name of his podcast. But dig a little deeper and you'll see, just go with the people, because that's who you represent.
So yeah, well, I appreciate you having us on. Feel free to, anybody can follow me on Twitter at DesOrmeau. And if you're experiencing this unemployment, anybody out there, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear your story and hear what the people are actually experiencing instead of just the press release part of it. But Happy New Year to everybody, and thank you so much for having me on.
Happy New Year to you as well. You have a big job ahead of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But you're doing a great job. So welcome to the team.
Thank you. I appreciate it.